Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is a video on the Bosque programming language. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce the name, but this has been a language I've been kind of following for a while and its development, and I'm finally kind of able to like dig my hands into it and play with it. So I'm doing a video to introduce you to the language for those who are interested. So what this language is, I'm going to just call it Bosque. Okay, it's probably pronounced Bosque or Bosque. I will. I don't know. I don't think I saw anywhere in the documentation where it really clarified what the pronunciation is, but bottom line, this is a new language from Microsoft. Okay, and the goal of this language is, I think, kind of similar in the goal I've seen with other languages like uh, Unisian, Ballerina, where they're just trying to create like a new language that's for today's sort of more modern cloud-based world. There's other stuff going on in Bosque, but I know like I saw some of that in the documentation, kind of talking about sort of um, being sort of built for like today's systems. You know, like dealing with a lot of like today's technology, which is why I also find like Ballerina fascinating with the whole kind of like concepts of being able to kind of like has built-in features for like code being able to deploy itself and set up its own Docker containers, etc. But this is still very early stages language, but you can play with it. Okay, so basically, let me walk you through the setup of that, because when you read through this documentation and you read some of the tutorials online, a lot of them are kind of older from when they first kind of announced the language, like a little bit over a year ago. And basically, the setup has changed, and it took me a while to figure it out. So let me just walk you through it to save you time. There's also a blog post that I have on it. So if you go to my blog, toots.alexmercedcoder.com, okay, there is a article. Let me just hit shift to refresh. Oh, caches. There we go. Creating a Bosque programming language dev environment 2021, where I'm going to walk through these initial steps that I'm going to talk to probably in a little bit more depth. But just to kind of walk you through what code is in here. Okay, so if you were to clone this repository, onto your computer, you don't necessarily even need to do that. Really, all you really need is this Docker file. Okay, that's going to be the main thing we need to get you set up. Okay, but basically, just to walk you through what's inside these folders, if you wanted to install it for yourself on the computer, I was not able to do that successfully. I was not able to get the Z23 library to compile. Although I think the way I'm going to do it with Docker is actually a better way of doing it. But that's what this is. Okay, this is the documentation. So basically, in here they have a little documentation about the Docker container. Again, there's a lot of documentation. A lot of it leaves little things out that would make things easier. So that's why I'm making this video. This is the documentation on the language. Again, you'll see like there's a lot of things noted in the documentation of like features that are not implemented yet, or things that need to be updated. So you do your best. You're gonna have to figure it out as you go along. This is real Wild West if you're someone who likes to play with new programming languages. This is about libraries. There's not really much anything in here. So I think that's gonna be more later on. Like right now, they're still working on the core language. And this is just kind of like a paper that can explain like the who, what, where, and why. Like why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this language? So that's all there. And then there's the main README, which also has like a spattering of all those things in one. All good fun reading. Okay, so essentially, how do we set this up? And then this Bosque language tools thing is the VS Code extensions, so that we get like syntax highlighting and all that stuff. Cool. So basically, with this Docker file, what you want to do is put this. So what I did is I put the Docker file in a folder that I wanted to use to work with this language. So I have this Bosque folder, and I have my Docker file in there. And then in VS Code, I downloaded the extension remote container. It's right there. It's right here. We go. Okay, remote container. So you just download this. Make sure you read the documentation, because you do have to have Docker. I'm on Linux, so all I needed was to have Docker, the latest version of Docker installed, and the latest version of Docker Compose installed. I think if you're on Windows, you probably have to set up Windows subsystem for Linux and do some stuff. And I'm not quite sure what you'd have to do on Mac. So read the documentation for this extension, so that way you have it set up right. But once you have it set up, this is actually a really fascinating extension. I never was aware of this. This would have made me setting up all these other environments for all these other languages I play with so much easier. But essentially what you do, you just bring up the control palette. So on Linux, that'd be Control-Shift-P. and then you're going to use this command right here, remote containers, open folder and container. First, it's going to have you choose a folder, okay, and then it's going to ask you what container to open it up in. And I chose the Docker file. You can choose the Docker file if you have a Docker file in the folder. So I'm like, okay, hey, I want to open it. So what it does, it'll build a container based on the Docker file in there, and then open it. And then it creates this dev container file, and then this creates the information, so that way VS Code knows next time you open this folder, what container is this folder going to use, and basically you don't have to think about it again. Okay? And now you basically have this container environment where you're kind of using this folder outside of the container, so you don't necessarily have to go install stuff on your actual system. So you don't have to worry about like the install screwing up anything else up. You can just operate in there. And the cool thing is that there's already a whole bunch of like basic ones already there. So if you were looking at like most of the main languages, there's already a container that kind of has it all set up. You would just sit there and say, okay, I want the Python container, I want the Ruby container, and you have a Ruby environment without having to install necessarily Ruby on your machine. In a nice sort of Unix environment. So super, super, super cool. Okay, cool. So I get that set up. So basically, again, I open up this folder in there, I choose that Docker file, and I'm all set to go. You can see I have this nice terminal that's open inside the container. Okay. Now the next issue I had was, how do I compile code? Because the command that's in the documentation or in the tutorials I found, none of them worked. I got the concept. The idea is you need to get to this xgen file. Okay, this xgen, sometimes it's called xgen .execute. In the case of the container, it's called xgen.js. And that basically runs the script that gets your code compiled. And I had to hunt around. I found it. Okay, this is where I found it, located inside the container. Okay, so again, if you read my blog article, it's there. And again, I can't guarantee that in the future, in later versions of the Docker container, in later versions as they continue to work on Bosque, whether this will change its location. But basically, again, these are the steps I went through to figure this out. So once I found the file, the thing is that this command is just a lot to type. Okay, so what I did is I created this bash script. So basically, I just took this part of the command, the node this file, and then just aliased it to Bosque. So that way I can just run Bosque as my command. So every time I open up this environment, so every time I open up this folder, the container spins up, I run the bash script, so that way I can just use Bosque as my command going forward. So this is a little bit more setup than probably for most like programming environments, and the language is not finished enough for you to actually probably build anything production-wise with it. So this is merely like for those who just really love programming, love trying out new programming languages, and who knows, this language may become the next big thing once it's done, so it doesn't hurt to kind of get an early feel for it. Okay, it does have a lot of cool ideas, things I've seen in other languages, but just like, you know, every time you always see like a lot of cool ideas, you never see them all in one place. So I was like exploring the different languages so I can see those ideas over and over again and really kind of get comfortable with what everything is. Okay, so that kind of lines it up there. So I have this script that I've already created, hello world. Okay, I'm not going to go through it yet. Just going to first compile it. So now that I have that alias set up, I can just type in Bosque -o for output. So I want the output to a file called hello world. And the file I want to compile is hello world.bsq. So bsq is the extension for Bosque files. So when I hit enter here, let's see, like that's much more succinct. Thank you, bash script, for making life easier. It just compiles it. Okay, so it's writing everything in C and then compiling the C++. So essentially, like the process is basically the JavaScript file runs the script that runs the transpile. It transpiles Bosque into C++, and then from C++, Bosque is compiled into executable code. And essentially now that it's, I can just do / hello world, run the file, run the executable, and there's my hello world. Okay. Now I made this hello world file a little bit more complicated because I was playing around with the language. So let me just walk you through what we're seeing here. Okay, so namespace, this is not something new. You've probably seen this in many other languages where you kind of have like a namespace. You're just basically saying this is part of this package. Not so quite sure what the entry point keyword's doing there. I'm assuming that if I had multiple files, that I sent to the compiler, this would signal to the compiler that this particular file is the entry point. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that mentioned in the documentation. It's there. I don't touch it. It works. Now, if you're familiar with compiled languages, generally all compiled languages, their entry point is the main function. The main function is essentially, when you run the script, essentially what you're doing is you're running the main function. Okay, that's literally all a program is. Whenever you open up any program, you are executing a function that has all the other logic of that program. Okay, so the main is your program. And we're just saying that this main returns a string value. Okay, and in this case, because right now it doesn't seem like there's like a equivalent of like a print or log function. What I can do is I can have the main function return a value, and that value will show up here in the terminal. But basically here, var, there's two keywords. Like if you know JavaScript, and again, this is from Microsoft. They created TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript. So you see a lot of those TypeScript-like ideas here, but with just a lot more sort of other stuff going on too. So basically, var represents a variable. So this is actually a thing you can reassign. If I use let, then it's not reassignable. So I could just switch this to let and it would still work because I don't reassign it. But let's say I did that, and then I were to do words equals cheese. This should cause me a problem because let should be not mutable. Okay, so let's try it out. Let's try the compiler and see if it complains. I got an error. See, because variable defined as a constant. Okay, but if I change it back to var, okay, and again, I'm declaring a variable called words, and I'm declaring that this words variable is a string. Okay, so I'm typing. So this looks a lot like TypeScript as far as the way you're typing. Okay, and then I am passing the result of this function. I'll come back to that. But I'll do it again, and see, that time it worked because var I can reassign. Now let's try the typing out. Let's see if we can break the typing. So instead of reassigning it to another string, let's reassign it to an integer and see if it complains. And the compiler complains. Okay, I've assigned the value that's not a subtype with a declared variable type. So it doesn't get too specific yet. Again, this is a fairly young language. Not even close to a 1.0, I don't think. But in that case, it's telling me that, hey, this you declared a string and this you sent me an integer. Okay, so these are features you're probably familiar with in many programming languages. So you're seeing here, there's nothing too hard to pick up here yet. Okay. Now again, I'm running this function, hello. And for some reason, if I try to define the function above the main function, it didn't quite work right. Again, the documentation's kind of still early stages, so didn't give me really any information as to like what's the proper place or proper way to declare a function. So this is all me sort of playing around and experimenting. But it does work if I declare it down here. Okay, and again, I can declare my parameters, and I can declare a string as my return value. And the cool thing is you can actually define multiple return values. So I'm going to try that out. I haven't tried it yet. I don't know if it's implemented, but it is in the documentation. So we'll try that out in a second. Okay, but I return X. So I pass the string hello. It just returns hello right back, assigns it to words. So that's essentially how that is working. So again, if you've used functions in any language before, that should be pretty familiar. Okay, but let's try this. Let's try doing a multiple return value. Okay. So if I remember right, when I read the docs, it looked something like this. So I will just say, hey, string, you string. Okay. And I don't think I had to wrap it in curly brackets on the exit, but let's see here. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the docs. So I'm going to go to head over the docs, head over the language, overview. Okay, look for the multiple return values, type system, expressions, non-chaining, multiple return values. Where are we at? Variable assignment, statement calls. Must be earlier. Variable and scoped access, constants. Type systems, errors, determinacy. Type system, core types. Where's all the function stuff? Okay, that's P code thing. I think that's gonna be like arrow functions from when I was reading it earlier. Boop, doop, 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 doop. So it's probably gonna be right before this. Okay. Arguments. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so we do need to use the curly brackets for the return values, but we need to use equal signs there. Okay, so essentially it would look like this. Okay, hello. Hey equals hello. And did we use a comma? I think we did. Yes, we did. Okay, then you do have to use semicolons. That's another thing. And then you will be world. Okay. Cool. And then let me just see how that assigns it. And P. Okay. And I mean, this is a very similar pattern like if you returned an object in JavaScript. So it's not like super weird return multiple values kind of thing. Like the other languages do it in a way that's less obvious. I think in Kotlin and Swift you can return multiple values in sort of a more like separate way. Okay, so let's return that. And let's say let's match this return value. I want to see if I do that, will this work? So I'm going to say this is going to return this. Okay, and we're going to return words. And I'm going to get rid of the string value. So we're going to say no arguments. Okay, and let's see if does it compile. Nope. Let's see here. Where did it break? Return expected. It looks like it expected a curly bracket somewhere. So let's see here. Return hello you. Hey string you. Let's compare. Y. I mean, we did the thing. Oh, it looks like there was maybe multiple errors. Hello world 6. Assign a value is subtype declared variable type. Oh, I see. This needs to be expect this return value. So let's do that. Okay, so now we just have the errors on line 10. Found colon. Oh, I see why. This should be an equals. Okay. Let's try that out. So the errors are not too bad. Okay, that time it compiled. Okay, cool. So let's see the result. Okay, and then we do / hello world. And yeah, there we go. We get back our output. Okay, so nothing too exciting yet, but the idea is like now you can see you can play with the language, you can set up your environment. Hopefully this video was useful for anyone who's looking to play more with this language and kind of dive into it a little bit. So my name's Alex Merced from alexmercedcode.com. Give this video a like, give the channel a subscribe, go join the Slack community over there at devnursery.com. There's also a Discord community, and I'll see you guys later on. Ciao.